We supply water, recycled water, and wastewater to all those 5 cities, approximately 170,000 people. I think last time we checked it was 176,000. It was formed in 1960 with a 7-member board of directors. We have 28 potable reservoirs that you'll see throughout the district. If you live at the top of a hill, you may have one by your house. 12 recycled water reservoirs and 700 miles of potable water lines. So that's the distance basically from LA to El Paso as the crow flies. So it's quite a lot going on under the ground. We have 148 miles of recycled water pipelines and 537 miles of sewer pipelines. Now we provide 14 billion gallons average annual demand. So that is enough every other day to fill the Rose Bowl from the bottom to the top, just in our district. Most of that's going to be through irrigation water, which is why we're here, and we'll get into that a little further later. Okay, so where does water come from? There's an old saying, all the water that was ever here is here still. There's not going to be any more or any less water. We're kind of drinking the waters the dinosaurs were. In the way this works, the water system works, it's called the hydrologic cycle. And we can start, where most of the water is in the ocean, in our oceans and everything. So what happens in the hydrologic cycle? It evaporates from the ocean or lakes and things, and it condenses into the clouds. And when the clouds get full of water, we have precipitation, sometimes in forms of snow as well. So, and whenever that happens, so the clouds are full here, and it comes down as snow or water. Snow in the Sierras is good in the mountains and everything because that's how we fill up our reservoirs and everything. So all the water that comes down, it'll either go down into the ground when it fills up all of our groundwater, or it comes as runoff, which is basically comes down the hills into the streams, lakes, and everything, and back out into the ocean eventually to start the whole cycle again. So where do we get most of our water from? We get most of our water, I'm not sure if everybody's aware, we get about 70% of the water that we use is from the Colorado River, which is quite a long distance away where it starts. It serves the basin states, so there's 7 states that it serves, and those 7 states include Colorado, Utah, Arizona, Nevada, and California, and 2 Mexico states. So lots of people definitely depend on the Colorado River. So you'll see Lake Mead, all the big reservoirs, you probably heard that they were at historic lows through the drought that we were having. We had a pretty good winter even in Colorado, so it's starting to fill up a little bit, but it's very stressed right now. So the Colorado River supplies water to more than 25 million people and about 3.5 million acres of farmland, so it's very, very important for the Southwest to get their water from there. We wouldn't probably be able to be out here without it. And how do we get the water from the Colorado River? We have the Colorado River Aqueduct, which was built by the Metropolitan Water District in LA. They're the big boys that supply all the water to Southern California. They built that more than 70 years ago. So it's a 242 mile long pipeline, and it starts just west of the California border by Lake Havasu. So there's a 242 mile aqueduct that delivers it to Southern California. It's one of the all-time great feats of man engineering and everything, that we can take that water and move it all the way across basically the desert to get to us, up and over a couple hills. Okay, also we get 70% of our water generally from the Colorado River. The other 30%, it comes from the State Water Project up here in the Bay Area. Now that can be from groundwater. A lot of that is we want to have a good snowpack in the Sierras. It's very important. You may have noticed that we had a little bit of a hard water a couple years when we were in the drought. That's because we were not getting any water from the State Water Project because the snowpack was so low. So it was not filling up the reservoirs, and we didn't have enough to bring it down here to us. So the water was so hard because we were taking all the water from Colorado River, which was at historic lows. So the lower you get, the more sediment buildup you're going to have. But now, luckily, since we had a really good snow in the Sierras, it was about 160% snowpack in some areas. We were able to again start getting nice soft water being snow water that comes down into the reservoirs. Everything got filled up, and A couple of them busted, as I'm sure everybody heard. So hopefully they get all that figured out. But it supplies water to about 25 million Californians, just Californians. So very, very important. And they're working on trying to get some different ways of getting it down to us. I'm not sure if you've heard that in the news. So that'll be going on in the next few years. How else do we get it? We have local sources. This is a picture of the Baker Treatment Plant. It's in Lake Forest. It's a joint regional project by 5 South Orange County water districts: Irvine, Santa Margarita, ourselves, Trabuco Canyon, and El Toro Water District. Basically, it's there for increased water supply reliability. The treatment plant provides increased water supply to South Orange County by increasing our local treatment capability from multiple water supply sources, including untreated water from the Metropolitan Water District, again up in LA, through the Santiago Lateral, and surface water from the Irvine Lake, which is right over there in Mission Viejo. In the plant, it can also provide reliable drinking water for us in times of emergency. If there's an earthquake or something where something were to happen to the pipelines where we're getting the water from the aqueducts and things like that. In extreme emergencies, yes, ma'am. And the Baker Treatment Plant does take water out of the Irvine Lake already, so that they would just treat it.
Where's the Irvine Lake?
It is, what road is that off of? Santiago Canyon. Yeah, out on Santiago Canyon.
Oh, okay.
It's beautiful out there, though. So, as our population increases, as I'm sure everybody's noticed, the population's increased. I'm from Kentucky, so I'm part of the problem. Sorry. It's too nice here. The weather's terrible back there. We had to get out. So, as the population increases, demand for water increases, obviously. So here's a couple graphs, but what you guys want to focus on here, and this is a great statistic that we have. So in 1991, our district's population was 112,000. So 25 years later, we've grown to 176,000. Now look at this GPCD, that's gallons per capita daily. So we were using 232 gallons per capita per person daily. That's including irrigation, which is again going to be the main, about in our districts, about 80 to 85% of our water most of the time is going to be from outdoor irrigation. And that has decreased in 25 years. We use about 55% of the water per capita now. And we owe a lot of, that's all due to you guys and really taking it seriously that water is a precious source, and we can't just be watering our grass all the time, every day of the week and everything. I think all of our outreach that Meta's helped with and all of us at Moulton Niguel it's really helped to, again, we use about 55% of the water that we used 25 years ago. And as you can see, our water prices have increased, but only by about, they've doubled, but it's went from 80 cents to $1.60. We do have some additional service charges, but again, that's kind of inflation and the way things go. We have upkeep on all the pipe. We have 700 miles of potable pipeline that we need to upkeep. So now nobody has any questions. Everybody knows that we have a water-based budget. Everybody has their own budget. Nobody has any questions on that, correct? We can move on? No? Okay.
Why is it so low?
Yes. We'll get to it.
So much water by the ocean.
Yes. Desal.
When are we going to tap into that one?
And they are, and I'm sure you've heard in Carlsbad, they have the largest one in the Western Hemisphere desal plant. And is it Huntington Beach that's looking at putting in one? Potentially. It's very expensive right now. So if you all think your water's expensive now, it would increase it, at least double it. We have a couple people that live in San Diego County, and you have to pay service charges just for the desal of up to $50 or $60 a month, and then you start paying your water bill. So along with the way everything works, the first computer was $1 million, and it took up the whole room. They'll figure it out, hopefully, sometime in the future to get it cheaper if we need to. A lot of island nations use desal. It's very big, and that's just because they don't get the rain. Australia, places like that. I think Japan is very big on desal. So hopefully in the future we can. Right now, we're focusing on the conservation efforts are allowing us to still get by with the amount of water that we have from the Colorado River and the Sierra snowpack. So again, in the future, I'm all for it. You know, hopefully they'll get it figured out to where it'll be cheaper. Okay, so our budgets. Everybody has their own personalized budgets. Does anybody know how it works? Show of hands. That's what we thought. We got one because you've been here. He's cheating. Okay, so the way it works, you have your tier 1 rate is for your indoor allocation. And the way you get your indoor allocation, we have most of you all probably live in a single family house since you're here for an irrigation class, not like condos or anything like that. So say we're in a single person or a single family home, we give you a default of 4 people in the house. So some of you may just have 2, 1, 3. So if you do have less, you're actually getting more of a budget. If you have more people that live there, say if you have 5 or 6, please call and let us know because that's very important for your budget because each person is allocated 60 gallons per person per day inside, okay? So if you have 4 people, which we have everybody as a default of 4, so that's really 240 gallons a day just for indoor use, times the number of days in the billing cycle. It usually averages 30-day billing cycle. So that's how you can multiply out to get your indoor budget. So you take the number of people, which is generally 4, times 60, times the number of days in the billing cycle. And this conversion factor of 748, that is a billing unit. So we measure everything in billing units. In a billing unit, the reason why it's 748, that odd number, 1 cubic foot of water is 7.48 gallons. So it's 100 cubic feet of water. And that's how they measure a billing unit. That's for your tier 1, and we'll get into it a little more further along. Your tier 2 focuses on your outdoor. Now there's nothing separating saying, oh, you turn on a faucet in the house, so we're going to charge you this rate. It's basically you use up your tier 1 rate, which is lower. So once you use up, say you're allocated 10 indoor billing units, once you use those 10 billing units, then we just go into the tier 2 rate, which is for your outdoor area. Now this is measured, this takes into place, now if you have a very large lot and say you're in Mission Viejo, you're going to have a lot higher budget than somebody with a small lot in Dana Point with the cooler weather and everything. So the size of your lot has a lot to do with it. Also this evapotranspiration factor, a lot of smart guys got together and figured this out. It's above my head. Basically evapotranspiration is how much the plants sweat, which has to do with a lot with the sun, humidity. If you have low humidity, it's going to sweat a lot more. If it's hotter, in the summertime, the evapotranspiration factor is going to be much higher. So, and I'll show you on this next slide. Here, let's just jump ahead real quick. So we have 110 microclimate zones in our district, okay? And you can see basically the cooler microclimate zones are going to be Dana Point, the more coastal where they get the marine layers and everything. And the hottest areas are going to be kind of north Mission Viejo. So you can kind of see the difference. So we have basically a weather station in each one of these microclimate zones, and it's taken the evapotranspiration for your specific microclimate zone. And basically, that's why we can't forecast your bill, unfortunately, as well, because we can't forecast the weather. So they add up the evapotranspiration of each day. Say it's 0.12 each day for 30 days. They multiply that, they add up each day evapotranspiration, and that's how you get it at the end of the month. I just wanted to show you guys that. So you got your evapotranspiration from the microclimate zones, and you multiply that. Again, this is very complicated. Hopefully we'll make it a little easier. Your plant factor is 0.7. That's basically saying that a plant factor, say California natives have a very low plant factor of 0.2, meaning they need 0.2 inches of water. I'm not sure how many days or weeks. Like they have a lot lower plant factor of 0.2, whereas like cool season grass, like Kentucky bluegrass, it has a very high, like 0.9 plant factor. So we kind of err on the side of caution for you guys to give you more of a budget. So it's basically saying your whole lot is like warm season grass, which everybody has trees and shrubs involved in their lawn, I assume, which they have a much lower one. So we just want to make sure that you guys have enough. So we erred on the side of caution for the 0.7.
And what's
It's the plant factor.
Okay,
Yeah.
but you said something about 2 inch.
Is it measured in inches, the plant factor, Shane?
It's a constant.
Yeah, it is a constant.
Yeah.
It's
Oh, okay.
scaled from the largest water-using type of plant, so.
Which is,
Look at, like turf grass, and then they scale it down to the water needs of other plants.
yeah, so it's like a percentage. Okay. Yeah, California natives need, once they're established, they need very minimal water, like a 0.2, like 20% of the water is like grass would need.
So the succulents take less water than 0.2.
What's that?
Succulent plants?
Succulents, no, they're about the same as natives require the least amount of water. Once you have a native established here, they're natives for a reason. They can survive without basically any irrigation from then on, unless we're in like a severe drought for a couple of years and it just doesn't rain. But yeah, they're natives for a reason. They survived here before we put all the pipes under the ground and everything. Started pumping water on them. Next thing, conversion factor. That's just to convert everything into gallons, and you also divide by 748. Again, that's a billing unit. 748 gallons of water. So that all sounds very complicated. It's basically the size of your irrigated area and the weather. So it's you'll see your budget go up and down a lot. That's going to be mainly because of the days of the billing cycle, but in the wintertime, you'll notice your budget's less because the days are shorter. The evapotranspiration is not going to be as high. They're not sucking water out of the plants as long with the cooler temps, shorter days, all that. Anybody have any questions on that? Yes.
What's the native plants?
What's the native plants? There's a lot of native plants, and we have a top 10 one right over there, but what's some good native plants?
There's just a large variety.
Yeah, there's
It
a,
depends on
yeah.
what-
Yeah, there's some nurseries, Tree of Life Nursery, things like that focus on native plants. So again, once you get them established, they're kind of, you can set them and forget them a little bit.
Give me an idea what a citrus tree would, what their plant factor would be.
It really changes. It depends on the variety of the citrus. And not to try to.
You should probably irrigate them real deep water than.
Exactly. Yeah, they want kind of deep and infrequent waterings because they need air as well. So they need air and water. So basically, you want to deep water them to push those roots down. It's very important. If you have any trees or shrubs, you can kind of let shrubs grow. Like I live in San Clemente. It's a little more coastal than most of these areas, but I haven't watered most of my shrubs all year, and they're just normal shrubs because they're very well established, been there for 30 or 40 years, so they have a very deep root system. So there's moisture in the ground that they're kind of always sucking up. But yeah, you're exactly right. For fruit trees and everything, you want a deep and infrequent soaking. Almost let it dry up a little bit so then it creates the air pockets, and then soak them again. Then they can drink it all up.
Now, in our area, when we moved in, homes were brand new, on either side of us, the ground was adobe.
Okay, just,
Yeah, the same as you were saying.
yeah. Oh, really? Okay. So that water just,
Yeah, we irrigate differently.
oh, yeah. I mean, and he'll get into that a lot. That's a very important part, your type of soil that you have. And yeah, that's why we got Shane here. He knows all about that.
You're gonna talk about rafts and the surface.
Yes.
Yep, he gets into it. Okay, so we'll move on. In how we talked about the irrigated area. So say you have 2,500 square feet of irrigated area you see on your bill, but you're like, well, my lot's 7,500. What we're doing, they had a couple of poor interns that sat at a desk for about 1.5 to 2 years, and they went parcel by parcel with a Google Maps and measured every bit of irrigated area. Now we count pools as irrigated area because they use about as much water as grass does. So areas that aren't or non-irrigable is going to be your house footprint, obviously, driveways, any hardscape, things like that. It looks like if this was synthetic turf, we wouldn't count it if we were out at the house because you don't water synthetic turf, obviously. And they always measured wide because we want to err on the side of caution for you guys. Now, where it may be different, and if this is true for you guys, again, feel free to give us a call in the water efficiency department because we would like to physically measure everybody. It's just that would take about 50 years to do because we have about 70,000 plus homes. But where it does differ is when you're looking at this view, this may be a very large steep slope, but you can't tell from here. So that's when we do find people have more square footage than is listed on their bill from this geo view. So when you have a big slope, it just looks like flat ground. So when we go out there, we have lasers where we can find that extra square footage. So if somebody does have a large downward slope or upward slope, feel free to give us a call and we can come out and measure it, because we do want to make sure that you're getting the right budget. Okay, understanding your bill. So everybody gets these. Maybe you get them online, hopefully online. We'll zoom in here. So on the upper left-hand column, this is where it shows your water usage, okay? And it goes back a year, but so what we're focusing on here, and hopefully you don't have anything in these tier 3, 4, and 5. So this customer, as you can see, they were always right around their budget in black, maybe went over a little bit. Then they must have sprung a leak or something like this. So if anybody's had a leak, you've seen it jump up, that's when you give us a call and we try to figure out what's going on. So you have your indoor rate. So they had a 34-day billing cycle, you'll see right down here. And so 4 people in the household for 34 days equals 11 billing units. Once they used all that, they go into the tier 3. So they only have 3 billing units allocated, so their square footage is not going to be much. So it's 1,207 square feet. If somebody had, say, 12,000 square feet, it's basically going to be 30 billing units. Kind of see how that works. The more square feet you have, the much higher your allocation is going to be, because you need to water a lot more area. So they went over their budget. So you can see kind of as the tiers, as you go 25% over your budget to 50% over your budget, anything 50 to 100% over your budget, that's how the tiers are broken down. It increases incrementally.
So the chart, is it
Yep.
tier 1 or tier 1 plus tier 2? The budget.
The budget is your tier 1 and your tier 2. So we give you your indoor and your outdoor, and that's your budget.
Equal to 14.
Yes, sir. Yep. That's their budget, which will be, where's that at? Right here. Your water budget for this, 14 billion units, and they use 48. Whoopsies. So they probably had some type of a leak, irrigation leak inside. Who knows? We see this all the time. Or they did that. That's right. We get a lot of those, and it's in April, so maybe that's right. Yeah, good point. So does anybody have any questions as far as their bill goes? Does anybody look at it and have no clue what's going on? There's just a lot on there. Anybody have any questions about it? Everybody's got it, kind of? What you're going to be focusing on basically is this little section right above the graph. It shows your allocation and your total usage, and it'll even show you your ET. This is the evapotranspiration we were talking about. 4.35 is basically after 34 days of that daily ET, they added it up, and it equals 4.35 inches of water that needs to be basically put back into the plants. Okay, if nobody has any questions, we can move on. A lot of common misperceptions. We take calls on this quite often. One of the main ones is one tub of water or one shower is going to max out my indoor allocation. That is not true, because typical bathtub uses about 30 gallons of water. A 10-minute shower, you're going to use about 25 gallons depending on the flow rate of your shower head. And that are so if you're taking a real long shower, you're going to use if you take the 30-minute showers, you can feel a little bit shamed. You're using about 50 or 60, but it's still not going to go over your budget. Another common misconception is our water is very expensive. If you guys ever go to the store, a gallon of the Crystal Geyser is about $2.49. The very good stuff for the fancy people, Fiji's $4.84. Gallon of milk, $6.29. And if anybody's like me and has to drink a gallon of coffee a day because I have a kid and one on the way, that's going to cost you about $20. So I'm spending $20 on coffee a day. So the difference in our water and that is slightly different. 1 gallon of water in this, so we're averaging basically a billing unit for the indoor and outdoor is going to be $1.67. That equals out to what is that? 1/5 of a penny per gallon of water. Okay, so that kind of puts it into, when you use 748 gallons of water, it's $1.67. So it's about 1/5 of a penny. So if you take a 10-minute shower, the cost is a nickel. Okay, so that's why we're having an irrigation workshop. We don't necessarily focus on the indoor usage because we don't really speak about indoor conservation too much because we don't think people are running the shower tap on purpose and everything. It's the knowledge of how much water the outdoor water really uses. So, and it's slightly cheaper, 1,245 times cheaper than buying it at the store. So slightly cheaper. This is our main probably common misperception. I water my grass 4 times a week and shower every other day. Why is my bill so high? So again, everybody focuses on the indoor, but what we're here to do is kind of open your eyes that it's about the outdoor. So this is basically showing if you water your grass 4 days a week, 10 minutes per station, which we would say is probably too long, but we'll get into that a little longer. So most sprinkler head stations have 6 heads, 5 stations. So that's basically 30 sprinkler heads, okay, that you have going off 10 minutes, 4 days a week. And they generally use about 1.5 gallons per minute as opposed to 2 gallons of a shower head. So the best way I like to explain it, each sprinkler head that you all have on your property, that uses about as much water as a shower head. So if you have 40, or in this case 30 sprinkler heads, that's like taking 30 showers every time that comes on. Yes? It does, and some of them are lower flow. You can have the high efficiency ones, the rotors, things like that, but they're still going to put out quite a bit of water. The very low efficiency ones are about 1 gallon, but there's generally even more than that, 1.5. A lot of them go up to 2.5. You can use more on one sprinkler head than a shower, okay? So it's kind of, that's where all the water's going. You're taking 30 showers as opposed to 1 shower, basically, when you turn on all those sprinkler heads. So basically, when you do the math, we don't need to run through all the math, but this is for 4 people in a house taking 4 days a week shower for 10 minutes. Here's the difference. You're going to use 320 gallons as opposed to 1,800 gallons. So about 6 times more water in your irrigation. And here's kind of something to show you. You can fill up a little hot tub, which would be nice. Everybody likes hot tubs. Or you can fill up a whole water truck full of water. That's what you're putting on your lawn basically each week right there.
This would be 4 times a week at 10 minutes.
Yes, ma'am. Yep. Yeah, which is probably about average for our customers we find when we go out on home surveys and things like that. A lot of times the lands, and Shane will get into it, a lot of people don't touch their irrigation timer, the landscapers do it. Oh, it's something turns brown, they crank it up every day. So I went to a couple houses today that were doing it every day for 10 minutes. So it's like, ugh. Yes?
Have you changed it? Because I thought when we were in the drought, it
Uh-huh.
was twice a week,
We,
or probably five minutes a day.
yes, ma'am. We used to have that. That was before my time. Shane, were you here when
Yeah,
we had set watering
there was
days?
a time a number of years ago, but with this last drought about probably 2 years ago when it was in its worst part, every customer still had a budget. So if they called in, we would give them a general recommendation of maybe 2 weeks, but there was no hard and fast rule that it was only on certain days and for only a certain amount of time. So that has,
So we're thinking years ago.
yeah, that was probably
Yeah.
about 8
And-
years ago.
And what they found out was when you gave people two watering days a week, they would turn it on for 30 minutes. They're like, well, I'm just going to water the heck out of it. And if you're watering grass for 30 minutes, you're basically refilling the aquifers under the ground, which, you know, the roots aren't that deep, so you're just watering the ground. And they found that a lot of times people are using more water than if they were just watering their normal 4 days a week in the summer. So on the last drought, when we did the rate structures and everything, we went away from that, and that's why we have the budget. So as long as you stay within your budget, you're all good.
What,
Oh.
have you calculated into that also, like hand watering with a hose?
Into the budget?
Well, okay, we run our sprinklers 3 times a week,
Okay,
and 3 of our stations are like 6 minutes each,
okay,
and 1 station is 4 minutes.
okay.
But then every other day.
You hand
I do
water?
I do the hanging pots.
Oh, okay, yeah, and no, that's all calculated. If it's irrigated, we can't really tell hanging pots if it's underneath something, but we would count anything. So, yeah, it's calculated in your budget, basically. If you have a ton of hanging pots that may be under something and you wanted to give us a call, because maybe we'll find some extra square footage. Like, we count diameters on pots when we go out to physically measure. But say you have 20 potted plants, that's only going to equal out to maybe 100 square feet or so. So it's not really going to change your budget. You need about 500 extra square feet to get an extra billing unit, and that's in the heat of the summer. So it doesn't really change it that much. So it should be factored in. Again, when they measured when the interns were they're measuring for 2 years when their hands were cramping, they measured wide, just to make sure we gave everybody enough for the potted plants and things like that.
I would
So.
be curious to know what, we have a hill in the middle of our backyard,
Okay.
so it's not a flat, but
Yeah.
if you looked at it from above.
Is it like just like a little slope or something? It's pretty big?
Yeah, we're in a tri-level house.
Okay. Yeah, I mean,
You know,
oh, I got you. Yeah, it may be worth us coming out. The areas that we typically find it are in Old Mission with the bigger lots, and Moulton Niguel is very big because they have the houses that go all the way down to the house or to the horse farm or track. So we find lots of extra square footage there. Generally, if you have a pretty flat piece of property, it's pretty spot on, if not a little more than we would physically measure. So.
We live in an area that doesn't naturally have a lot of rain, and so that's why we have irrigation systems in the ground. If anyone's been from back east and transplanted to California, you may have seen these things in the ground and not know what they were. They are irrigation systems, and what they're designed to do is mimic the natural rainfall that we would like to have, because as John shared, it doesn't always come in the equal amount every year. Some years are wetter than others, and even sometimes during the year, it's not always at the same time in its wet season. So with the irrigation system, we're trying to mimic natural rainfall. So we were concerned that it's watering the right places, that it's watering all of the plant material evenly so you don't have dry spots or wet spots. It's an even distribution of the water coming out, and that it's happening at a proper schedule, that it's not potentially going on every day and creating a mushy, muddy lawn, that it has enough time to allow for some dryness to pass, evaporation, as well as the plant material using that water beneficially to grow and to stay healthy. And so that's what we're going to get into, because a lot of times, if you've ever woken up early in the morning or been out for whatever reason late at night, you may have seen these type of pictures in your own community or HOA, where you see just a river that you never knew was there, but it's all going into the storm drain. Because again, these come on automatically. It's trying to free ourselves up to do more important things like relax because of our busy lives and everything. So a lot of times there'll be issues that will take place with our systems, but we won't know about it until either we get a high bill or maybe a neighbor or a friend tells us, hey, I noticed this or that when I was walking my dog. So it's just to make customers aware, because what it ends up happening is that customers unintentionally will water 30 to 300 times more than is actually needed because of inefficiencies such as broken heads or areas that are watering that don't need to be watered. And so with the irrigation system, you're going to have a lot of pieces that will comprise the system as a whole. And so making sure that we understand some of the terminology, because we've heard this, what we call an irrigation timer or a sprinkler controller. We've heard it called the box on the wall. We've heard it called the electrical panel, because again, sometimes it's a landscaper that's doing the maintenance, or it's a new homeowner that's never had an irrigation system, so this is all new to them. So just being familiar with some of the pieces, there's going to be a water meter that we use to track how much water was used for billing purposes, and then in some cases there'll be pressure regulators, controllers, and those come in all shapes and sizes. There'll be valves, there'll be pieces of equipment that you may see. This is a condensed version where we have the meter coming in. There'll be a shutoff valve that you can stop the flow of water if you need to make a repair. And then these are the automatic valves with their wiring. The wiring will connect to your timer, which may be in your garage or outside in the yard somewhere. And this just allows it to do its automatic system. So you don't have to physically be out there at early in the morning to turn it on manually. or it just allows you to set it and then it'll go through its regular system as it's been programmed to. And then of course all the water will go out to the individual heads. And so just understanding that there's moving parts and pieces, and when you're communicating with a landscape professional or a member of our water agency, you know, just understanding that there may be different terms, and if you're unsure, just ask for, you know, clarification, so that way we're all on the same page, because it can be frustrating if there's a misunderstanding, and so we don't want to have that happen. And so with sprinkler types, as it's been mentioned before, there's different types. There's rotors, which you'll usually see in larger open fields in the city parks, any of the football fields. Those are usually irrigated by the large rotors. And so there's also the impacts, which are the ones that you'll typically hear that go tick, 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 and it'll go back. Those are what are referred to as impact sprinkler heads. There's spray heads that are more traditional and that we see more commonplace now. One of those being an old brass sprinkler head that you can find at most of the supply Home Depot locations. There's also pop-up sprays with different height intervals. And these are very similar to the brass ones, but they're made of plastic material with different heights. You can have 6 to 18 foot pop-ups that they're called, or you can have 6-inch pop-ups. Even some of these smaller 2-inch pop-ups. There's different nozzles that will fit onto each of those. They have nozzles that just spray in a constant uniform fashion. There's some that are almost a hybrid between the rotor and the spray. Those are referred to as rotating nozzles. They do have rebates currently, and so those let the water out a little bit slower, and so there's not as much of a potential of the runoff situation from happening. So just being aware that there's a lot of different technology out there, and so based on what you're trying to accomplish and also what you're trying to water, that'll all determine on what you decide to install, and also what you're comfortable with. Because if you're not comfortable with it and you're apprehensive in using it or even putting your hands on it, that's not a necessarily good scenario. So we also have bubblers as well that are typically used in the planter areas of the home. And so with the design, this is a little overhead simple view. Again, you have the timer, it's connected to a power source, and the wires go out to the individual valves that are either in the ground or above ground, but they'll have a wire connecting to it. And then with those valves, there'll be associated piping that will go off into the individual sprinkler heads to allow for the water to irrigate. And so real quick with the timers, you'll see here that they're connected to an outlet, and inside of the timer, there'll usually be a spot for you to include a backup battery. And so if you see something like this where there is no backup battery, that's not a good scenario to have. You want to have the backup battery in case there is a power interruption or a power interruption or outage, because what will happen is the power will allow the system to work and the valves to open and close. If there is not enough power, the battery backup will just keep the program that you have entered from being wiped out. Because if you don't have a backup battery, the typical default setting when power is restored is going to be watering about 10 minutes every day at midnight, 7 days a week. And so a lot of times when a customer has not installed a battery, or the battery has died and is no longer operating, and there's a power interruption and then it gets turned back on, it resets the timer, the customer is oblivious to what has happened until they get their bill or somebody notifies them. And then by that time they're frustrated, they're not sure what's going on. And so we just try to minimize that and educate the customers, because that's an easy fix that can be avoided in a high bill and frustration and everything. And so again here, this is showing you there's a main line and individual valve, and as John talked about earlier with sprinkler heads on a zone, This is what we consider a zone or an irrigation area. It's going to be limited to a certain number of heads. Typically it's about 5 or 6 heads, and so that's pretty common with a residential setup. And so just being aware that this is kind of what it looks like underground. And so with the system, as we talked about, there's different heads, but even within the heads, there's different patterns to water different shapes and sizes, because not all of our landscapes are perfect squares or rectangles. There's nice little curves and walkways and planter areas that we have. So the manufacturers of the irrigation equipment realize that, and so they've come up with different spray patterns to be able to allow the proper watering of your landscaped areas. And so if you were to have a designer map out how the spray patterns would look, you would see a nice little fun geometric picture like this. This is theoretically going to be some grass area, and again, you want to have it watering everything as evenly as possible. So what they've done is they've measured out what the theoretical distance of the spray pattern would be with this center spray head. It would be something like this full circle. You see that full circle there. And for instance, this quarter, you would see here in the corner, which would be just watering a quarter area. And so when you put them all together, you'll see these overlapping areas and their associated water output for each of the heads. And so if we were to take out this little square would be getting a total of 4 gallons per minute, okay? It would be getting a little bit of water from this full head sprinkler. It would be getting a little bit from this quarter, as well as a little bit from this half here and this half here. So you'll see that there's an overlapping, because in case one of these sprinkler heads fail or there's a clog of some sort, at least you'll have additional ones that will kind of theoretically pick up the slack, so that way you'll have less dry spots and hopefully none. So, and again, theoretically it should all be perfect, but there's other things that happen. It's all conditional upon the proper installation of it and everything, as well as maintenance, because if it's not maintained well, it's generally only going to last for so long, just like most things in life. Our cars, our health, our relationships, we have to maintain them. Otherwise, they can slowly degrade. So, didn't mean to get too philosophical, but just trying to drive the point home. So there's a lot of resources available to customers as well if you're more of a do-it-yourself, or you just want to empower yourself with more knowledge, so that way you can keep tabs on the professional that you've hired. These are resources that are free from the manufacturers of this equipment: Hunter, Rainbird, Orbit, Toro. You can go to their respective websites and download these for free. And a lot of this information that we're covering is in these documents, to where you could even start your own little business. There's literally that much information to empower you to understand the basics, to do it yourself, or at least be able to check up on those that are helping you do it. And so there's also Lowe's, Home Depot, Popular Mechanics, or other type of magazines. They also have a lot of resources on their websites. And then, of course, YouTube, we'll be seeing a lot of videos through our presentation, just to drive home the point that YouTube is a resource to be available to use, as well as Pinterest. Anyone know about Pinterest? If you don't, you can ask your children or grandchildren. They'll update you on what it is. But it's just another resource that's available to be able to get ideas of people who are more do-it-yourselfers. And so there's a lot of fun things that I would have never thought of that somebody else has implemented. So it's fun to look at that. And so once you've decided if you want to do it yourself, or if you've just educated yourself, but you want to know where there's some additional resources other than Home Depot or Lowe's or the big box stores, these are locations that are local where the professional landscapers will go to pick up their supplies as well as equipment. You don't have to be a contractor to visit these sites, so just be aware that if you do go and are trying to get a little bit one-on-one service, just be aware that they may have limited staff, but the staff there is very knowledgeable and able to help you. But just be aware that It will take a little bit of time, and they're there to help you though. And so now we're going to get into some of the things that we see very common that are issues that can easily be fixed. And so when was the last time, let's see, who has turned on their system in the last week to take a look at it? All right, one person. How about the last month? So people with a week, month. How about the last season with the beginning of the summer? How many people turned it on before the summer came? All right. So you turned it on yesterday. Every day you're turning it on? Turning it on to actually look at it to make sure it's all working right? Okay. So you like to just relax and watch it, or? What's that?
No, we just want to be sure that it's
You're just vigilant.
the area that we want, or is covered.
All right, that's great, you know. And that's, in a perfect world, we would love to have every customer doing that, but we understand, again, that we have these systems to allow ourselves a little bit more freedom to do other things that we enjoy. Some people that enjoy gardening, you know, they thrive in doing these type of fine-tuning and investigative exercises. But when you turn your system on, you can really quickly see if there's anything obvious. I mean, if you see sprinkler heads not popping up, that's obviously an indication of something that could be fixed. Misting, areas that are being watered other than the plant material, being the concrete or the asphalt. These are things that you can just make a note of and then either do it yourself later or then pass on to a professional that's helping you. So that way you can then hopefully check to make sure it was corrected and done appropriately. Because as we talked about earlier, we're trying to mimic natural rainfall, and then along with that the water is being evenly applied to the plant material. So in this scenario, this would be an example of a rotor sprinkler head that's shooting out a single spray of water but going in a circle or a half circle. But it's one stream of water, and we would like to see this sprinkler head going all the way over to the closest sprinkler head, because you want to have that head-to-head coverage that is referred to back here. Again, with that overlapping pattern, that's what we're seeing here, this overlapping pattern. Because if you refer back here, it has a total throw of about 30 feet in this example, but from this sprinkler head, the first 10 feet with this black information, it's only 1 inch of water that's falling in this first 10 feet, okay? The next 10 feet, it's about 3/4 of an inch, and in the last 10 feet, it's about 1/2 an inch. And so to the opposite side with this sprinkler head coming over, it's doing a similar pattern of where the water falls, but you'll see in each 10-foot increment, it's getting a total of 1.5 inches when you add up the two amounts. And so underground, this is what it would theoretically look like. A nice even reservoir of water within the soil for the plant material to use for its benefit. Now, what does happen sometimes if a system is not installed correctly, or if a head fails or it gets clogged for some reason, you can potentially have areas that will not have enough water and some that maybe will have too much. And so what a lot of times, it's the easiest thing to do by increasing the time and just almost in a sense flood irrigating those areas that aren't getting enough. But then what you have is too much water in these areas, which can create an environment for disease to thrive, because again, the plants and the soils, they need a nice balance of not only water but oxygen as well as mineral content in the soil. And so here's a picture of a newly installed irrigation system into a park strip. The grass area has not filled in yet, but they turned on the system to see how well it wetted the soil. And you can already see there's some brown spots, but there's also some darker areas where the water was applied. And so, surprise, surprise, you have some nice green areas that are filled in, which is what we would like to see, but then of course these brown areas. And so if you see this scenario in your yard, just be aware it may be something wrong with the sprinkler head. It just may be clogged. It may be a simple fix where you just have to clean out the head by taking it apart, unscrewing it. There's a filter on most of the heads. The filter, again, could have debris, material that was dislodged from a repair. We've seen all sorts of things. So, but just being aware that it's a pretty easy fix. Take it out, clean it out, and worst case, if this has been chopped off or broken, you can just buy a new head, but making sure that it's a similar head and swapping out like for like. And so another common issue is a mixed sprinkler zone. If you turn on your sprinkler system and you see all three of these type of sprinkler heads or even more at the same time, that's not a good thing. The reason why is because each of these sprinkler heads is going to let a different amount of water out every minute. So for instance, the spray head is just staying in one area and it's letting out usually about a gallon and a half to 2 gallons every minute. Whereas a rotor, it's letting out about anywhere from about the same amount, but again, it's only one stream of water that has to travel a larger area. And then with a drip or a micro spray, you're having less water come out, and it's going to be generally watering a different type of plant material. And so with this scenario, all at the same time, it's more than likely going to create an environment where you have soaked areas and other areas that aren't watered enough, or that the plant material is suffering. And so again, if you see this would be a fix where you can just potentially swap out the heads to where they're all the same, or you may have to make some more involved adjustments to the system. And that's where a professional would be able to help you. And so just being aware. So with another common issue is what we call misting or high pressure. So if you can see in this picture, you'll see that there's almost a fog or a mist that's happening. And what is causing that is there's too much pressure in the system, so it's forcing the water out of the openings to where the water droplets are very fine. And so if the droplet is very fine, it can be subject to wind, which will cause it to go into your neighbor's yard or back onto the street, which is not what we want to see. Customers have paid a lot of money, not only in the maintenance of their systems, but also in the initial design and installation. And so the water that you're also paying for, we want to have it be used to the area that's your property, not your neighbor or the street, exactly. And so to remedy this scenario, if you do have it, is you can install what are called pressure regulating bodies. So this device, as well as this one and two, these are what are called pressure regulating stems, and that's identified here on the head. It'll say PRS, which stands for pressure regulating stem. And then the other acronym that you see here is SAM. That's a seal-o-matic. So what that does is that prevents water from flowing out of the sprinkler head after it's been shut down. If you've ever seen a property that has a slope in their front yard, and after the sprinklers are turned off, you have one of the low sprinkler heads just bubbling water out, that's because there's nothing stopping the water. Inside of this head, there's a check valve that prevents that low drainage scenario from happening. Because in your irrigation system, all of the piping will naturally gravitate to its lowest point. And if that lowest point doesn't have a check valve to stop the water from escaping, it'll just ooze out and create a little soaked area. And so this type of a sprinkler head with the seal-o-matic and the pressure regulating stem will prevent both of those scenarios. And so I'll pass those out here.
That was SMS?
SAM is the seal-o-matic,
Oh, okay.
and then PRS is the pressure regulating stem. And these will be passed around so you can see them as well. And so this is a nice little video that demonstrates how effective these pressure regulating stems, how effective they are. And this is a YouTube video based on Ewing Irrigation, which is one of the professional landscape supply stores that was referenced a little bit earlier. And they have a large video library on YouTube to refer to. It can do the it can add the same benefit. Some people like the idea of doing it at each head. So it really does depend on your preference. You can have an individual regulator similar to this one before it goes into this manifold to supply each valve. That is one option you could do. And so it really depends on your preference and the cost difference. One of those regulators is maybe about 50 to 70 bucks, as opposed to each of the heads is maybe, those newer heads is an added $1 or $2 per head. So if you have a smaller lot, it may be more advantageous to do the individual heads, or again, if you prefer to have one regulator before everything, it just depends on your preference. There's really not one that's better than the other. So thank you for bringing that up, though. You could do that.
Is this set as a number?
Yes, this will be set. That's a good point. So to your question, these are generally set to about 50 PSI, which is higher than most manufacturer's recommendation of a sprinkler head of about 30 PSI. So if you did go this route, you can make an adjustment following the instructions to increase or decrease the pressure setting if you go this route. If you buy one that is already pre-installed with the pressure regulating head, then that won't need to have any adjustment. There won't be an adjustment that could be made. This is adjustable, yes. And so this is primarily meant for regulating the pressure going into the house because it is plumbing code that if the water supply at the street is over 80 PSI, the home builder needs to install a regulator, because that will just prevent any blowouts from the fixtures inside of the home, as well as water hammers that can potentially damage the plumbing inside of the walls. And so if you've ever turned on your faucet or any other plumbing fixture and then shut it down and heard some rattling in the walls, that's an indication of usually high pressure. And so if you have one of these and you do hear that rattling in the wall, that may mean that this is no longer working appropriately. Again, like everything, it has a shelf life or a lifespan, usually about 5 to 10 years, depending on the pressure that it's working with, as well as the maintenance of the device. So.
What kind of maintenance? I think this has been on the house for 20 years maybe.
Yeah, if it's been on the house for 20 years, what you can do is you can attach a pressure device, a pressure gauge to the hose bib, and then check it. Yeah, because of course if it's higher than 50 or 70, then it's not doing its job. And in some cases, these can actually fail and cause the pressure in the house to be lower than optimal. And so that's another scenario as well. So. And so moving on, another common issue is that you'll have a blocked spray pattern or a head that's not popping up all the way, or it was just installed and was too small of a sprinkler to begin with. A lot of times what will happen is that customers understandably have a budget in mind for the installation of a system, and so the 2-inch pop-ups, believe it or not, are cheaper. Go figure. There's less material, so it's understandable that they're going to be cheaper. And so when it comes down to cost, a lot of times customers will do that. It'll get the job done, but what happens is that we will start to see the plant material grow, and then that 2-inch pop-up now gets covered by the new growth of the shrub, or in some cases the grass. And so the spray pattern is blocked and it's not getting to all of the areas that it was meant to water. And so to fix that, ideally we would like to see larger
pop-ups installed, a 4 to 6 inch, but you could always swap that out after the fact if you realize that the majority of them are only 2 inch. And so again, just understanding that that's an easy fix. Another issue is low pressure, to where you see the heads coming up, but they're not popping up all the way, or the spray pattern that it's outputting is only going a few feet, or in some cases a few inches. And so if you see that, that's typically associated with too many heads on one zone, or there may be a break in the supply coming to the sprinkler. If you see a couple of heads that are popping up optimally and a few that aren't, that's typically more associated with a break in the line. And so just be aware that those are two common reasons why there's low pressure. And so if you've ever had to fix a main line, there's usually a lot of glue involved and a lot of waiting. It's usually a messy process. This is a piece of equipment that is highlighted where there's no glue that's needed, and you don't have to wait around for the repair to settle. And so we'll go ahead and show that real quick. All right, so if you've ever had to deal with gluing and cutting, it's very messy. And a lot of times with the typical scenario of cutting and then gluing the pieces together is that if you haven't done it correctly, or you turn the water supply back on too soon and the glue hasn't set, it can blow out the system all over again, and you have to do it all again. And that just becomes more frustrating. So the difference in cost for that slide repair is only about $2 more or so than a non-specific one. So this would be just a very general slide repair that you would have to glue together. And so I'll pass this one around. This is, again, just a typical one that you'd have to glue together, but you'll see it does telescope, and so as needed. And this part, somebody put it together. So there was 2 pieces, just as shown, but when I did pass it around, somebody put it together. So yep. So you'll be able to see with this piece of the equipment, which was showcased, it does have a little bit of metal, a few metal teeth. So if you do touch them, just be aware, don't cut yourself on them. But you can get some hands-on of what this is like. And so again, just another tool and resource to use if you choose to use it. Another common issue is where the spray pattern is going past or beyond the area that we're trying to water. And that's referred to as overspray. And so, again, it can be shown in fun designs that are on the fences of your property. We have seen this very common every day almost, where it'll be a HOA that's going on to a customer's fence, whether it be a wooden fence or a metal fence, and of course that's just going to degrade the material that much faster. So you might become more friendly with your neighbors sooner than you were expecting if this is happening. But to avoid that, all you would need to do is make an easy adjustment on your sprinkler using one of those nice little keys that we had handed out at the beginning, or that you were able to pick up. They do look very similar to a dog tag that you would put on an animal, but it is a sprinkler adjustment key that allows you, with this key, it allows you to not have to use this device. So this is pretty much just a flathead screwdriver. And so if you look at this key that's available, it has a little flathead screwdriver end on it. And then that would be allowed to allow you to make an adjustment to the sprinkler head, which has the opening here.
But
so you would.
That reduces the flow, though, right?
It reduces the spray pattern, and so.
What about the flow?
Well, it will also adjust the flow as well. So you'll be ratcheting it down, so less water is going to be coming out. And so,
So if you turn to the right, then it gets less, and you turn it to the left, it gets more?
yes, yes, left would be opening it up. Exactly. And so with this tool, this is the tool to do a similar adjustment, but just on a different manufacturer sprinkler head. So depending on if it's a Rainbird sprinkler head or a Hunter, and even within the respective manufacturers, they have different types of heads that may need a different tool. So just being aware that there are different tools that are available at the larger supply stores as well as the professional supply stores, and that you can make an adjustment. But just be aware that they do have limits. If you have a throw pattern of 10 feet and you're trying to get it down to water a little park strip area, that might not be the best scenario. So just being aware of that. And so, because again, with overspray, there's a lot of issues in the residential application, but also in commercial applications. If overspray is happening, it can cause premature degrading of the asphalt, which then costs more money in maintenance of the property as a whole because you're having to redo all the asphalt. It can also cause issues where you have trip or slip hazards, which can make an issue with all the legal beagle people out there in the world. And so just being aware, so that way you can make better decisions and then obviously notice those things. Because how many of you have seen these type of wet areas either in your property or somebody else's, or even in commercial settings, you know? And so again, it happens, and just being aware of it, and then hopefully it can be caught and then repaired in a timely manner. And so moving on to drip systems. Drip systems are very similar to a sprinkler system in that it's going to have a main line to supply the water. It's going to have a valve. The difference is that it will have a strainer of some sort. The strainer is just to catch any of the debris or particles that may be introduced and to prevent them from going further and possibly clogging up one of the openings within the drip tubing system. And so after it's gone through the Y strainer, it will typically have a regulator of some sort, because the drip tubing will have a lower operating pressure, anywhere from 10 to 20, 30 psi, just depending on your system, what you're trying to water, and how large of an area you're trying to water with a drip system. And so these are some, again, common components. You might not always see these, but you may see some of them. Some of the key ones is an adapter for the hose to transition from tubing to larger tubing. And then you'll have compression couplings, individual barb connectors. In some cases, you'll be able to have the emitters pre-drilled by the manufacturer, or you might have the option to just buy tubing that is complete and without any openings, and then you can use these barb connectors to make a puncture to the part of the tubing that you want to have the opening come out of.
What is the emitters?
The emitters would be of a scenario where you've made your own punctures within the tubing, and the emitter is just that. It's the opening where the water is being emitted from. And so as opposed to the predetermined, pre-drilled, spaced openings.
How many gallons per minute?
That's going to depend on the tubing that you get. Some of them are rated at gallons per hour, and in some cases also gallons per minute. So it really is a wide spectrum, and it depends on your application, what you're trying to water, how long you're willing to water it for. Because of course, if you have a system that's letting out X amount of gallons per hour, then you'll have to put that into the calculation when you're doing everything. And we'll kind of get into that a little bit later.
But you want to end up with the same amount of water covering the space that you would with a sprinkler.
Exactly. You want to have generally a similar amount of water at the end of the day. It's just a matter of how fast or how slow it's coming out of either a drip system or a sprinkler system. So, because drip tubing is applicable for not only turf areas, which can go underground, believe it or not, but also more commonly it's applied to shrub areas of a property, just to allow the water to go directly to the soil, so there's less potential of the evaporation from happening. And so with the drip tubing, as we mentioned, it comes in different colors, different lengths. This is an example of a retrofit where they left the existing sprinkler heads that were there and bought components to be able to change from a sprinkler head that pops up to a drip system. And we're going to watch a neat little video coming up. And so this is just showing that it's always a good practice to have a flush opening to, again, allow for any debris or just to clear out the system if you've made a repair or if you've made a change to the system. And then again, you have your connectors, your stakes to keep everything down. And also, this is an example of a piece of tubing that has a opening that's been fabricated by the manufacturer at a predetermined interval. And so this is going to be a video about showing application of a spray to drip conversion. This is by Rainbird, the manufacturer of this equipment. And so it's a perfect application of, thanks. So that was a beautiful application of a simple retrofit that you could easily do in a day or a weekend project. And so anyone live in Lisa Viejo area? Okay, so Lisa Viejo typically has a lot of smaller lot sizes, and a lot of the walkway areas going to the homes will have planter areas that will have spray heads, which could easily be transitioned into drip systems. And you saw just how easy it is. Now with this scenario, the video that we watched, that was with the assumption that all of your existing spray heads were Rainbird heads. Because again, if you had Hunter or just a mix mosh of things, you would not as easily be able to do that transition because you might not have fittings that would go on to each other. So just be aware that whatever you have at the end of the day, we would idealistically like it to all be a uniform system with the same manufacturer. So that way, when and if you have to do a maintenance upgrade or just a maintenance routine repair, you can know that, okay, I'm just going to go pick up maybe a few extra Rainbird heads because I know if this one breaks or this is one area that always gets hit by a lawnmower, you already have one kind of in the bullpen, so to say. And you just put them in. And so with drip, it has a lot of benefits, but there is also a downside to it. A lot of times drip is advertised as a silver bullet, and it's very natural that we always want to have the simple, easy fix that we can just set it and forget it type of a thing. But with drip, it unfortunately is not that type of scenario. It does let water directly to the soil, and there's less evaporation or elements affecting the water. You are able to water those irregular shapes as well. It operates at a lower pressure, so if that's an issue that you have at your home where you have low pressure from the water meter, drip is a great way to combat that low pressure. But it does require a lot of maintenance, a little bit more detailed maintenance that a traditional sprinkler system doesn't have. Because again, a lot of times the tubing is either covered by mulch or potentially covered by the plant material, leaves and branches. And so if there is a break or a clog or some sort of an issue, you may not notice it until you start to see the plant material being affected. And that's usually a little bit too late. And so again, if you have a drip system, just making sure that it is regularly checked and that it is maintained accordingly. Yes, sir.
When you use a drip system and on the surface it's covering maybe a small area,
Mm-hmm.
as it goes down, does it increase in size to cover the whole root, or does it become like a cone? Or
That's a great question.
How does it distribute?
It depends on the soil, and we'll actually see a video that has a cutaway that will show over time how different soils will be able to accept different amounts of water. And so that way again, these are all pieces of the puzzle that make a complete picture and a complete irrigation system work effectively to where you have less headache and healthy plant material. So one of the other common things we always like to address is that it is a common easy prey for vandalism. A lot of times children will kick at them, or dogs will nibble or play with them, or even just rodents. If you have possum or gophers, they will sometimes just eat at it. It's in their way, they don't know what it is. So that can be a maintenance issue too. So we'll have another quick little break. And how often? And it's not an easy answer. And hopefully through this information, you'll understand that anyone that tells you just off the cuff, it should not be considered doctrine by any means, because there's a lot of moving parts. So real quickly, to kind of go at a macro level, at a larger perspective level, we have here Mediterranean climates throughout the world. We in Southern California live in what's called a Mediterranean climate. You may have heard that. And so what that's referring to is the original location in the Mediterranean, which has a similar climate as we do here in Southern California. And so some of the things you'll notice is that these 5 regions throughout the world, they are between the 45th and the 30th parallel of their respective side of the hemisphere, as well as they are all western facing bodies. They're facing the western side of their respective body of land. And so with all of those pieces, it creates an environment that's unique. And so that's in contrast to a typical weather pattern that you might see on the East Coast, which has its rain as well as its summer wet seasons. And so to compare and contrast the two, non-Mediterranean climates, you'll see in this yellow area is showing a bell curve that is formed identifying the average temperature. Of course, in the wintertime it's lower because it's typically a snowy time of the year, and then as it gets into the middle of the summer, it increases and then decreases as it gets into the fall and then the winter time. Again, you see here the blue line is showing average rainfall. It can hop around, but again, in the wintertime, there's not much rain because it's coming in the form of snow. But then in the summertime, if you've ever been on the East Coast, I was just back in the Buffalo area, and there was lots of rain, and it would come, just drench for about 5 or 10 minutes, and then it would be clear again. But that's pretty typical of a summertime in the Garden State of New Jersey or in that surrounding area. And so again, you'll see in this green area, there's a gardening season which correlates to the summertime. And so understandably, a customer or an individual that grew up on the East Coast or with this type of a weather pattern, they were used to planting in the summertime, and then they get transplanted here to California. They try to plant in the summertime, and this is what they're dealing with. They're dealing with no natural rainfall and extremely high temperatures. And so you'll see there's quite a difference between these two. So you see here also with the Mediterranean climate, the growing season or the gardening season is actually in the winter and springtime and the fall. You see it shifts. So the summertime is not when you want to be starting to plant new material, because it's going to require a lot of supplemental watering that's going to come in the form of your irrigation system. And again, a lot of watering in the summertime will more than likely cause a high water bill. So just being aware of that will help you to allow you to make better decisions. Yes, ma'am.
So in the fall, what would you say? Would you wait till October?
Approximately, because we do, again, everything is cyclical with the seasons. We would love it to be linear, where every month it was, spot on like the one it was the year before. But it does change. So, but generally October time frame, especially toward the end of October, it's usually a more ideal time frame with weather conditions to allow for the plant material to be able to survive. Because again, the plant material, it's being transplanted from one original pot or location to a new one. There's naturally going to be a little bit of shock from the beginning. And so introducing that into a dry soil in the middle of the summertime, it's just almost setting yourself up for frustration. And so customers who go through this learning curve realize that they don't have a black thumb. They're just, they're just missing pieces of the puzzle to help them make the best decisions for their plant material. And so, again, even within Mediterranean climates, there is a spectrum of natural rainfall that will occur. So here, even in South Africa, which is still a Mediterranean climate, it gets on average about 22 inches of rain per year. And here in Laguna Beach, we're on the low end at about 12 inches per year. So even within those areas, there's still a spectrum. Another example is Southern California versus the Bay Area, still considered within that Mediterranean climate. But if you've been up there in the summertime, it's usually a lot more fog associated, humid weather conditions. So it has its own specific climate conditions as well. And so here we have summer wet areas, again, New York, New Jersey area, even areas that are considered deserts. If you've been out to Las Vegas over the last month or so, you'll see that the monsoon rains will come in and again kind of just drench the area, and then it'll be clear again. But it is a common phenomenon that happens. And so just being aware and adding all of that into the equation. And so with your timers, you're going to have a selection of timers available to you that are on the market. Some of them are more sophisticated than others because they're using the latest and greatest technology with the phone apps as well as wireless communication. Those are all great and dandy. Some of us are more comfortable with that than others, and so more variety as for better choices to be made for your preferences. So here's an example of a more simple timer. Here you have a slide rule where you can enter how much time you want each individual area to be watering for, as well as a digital display. So it's a little bit of kind of analog and digital information. Here we have a completely digital clock. Here we have the ratio timer that we have an example of here. That one actually doesn't have any settings for you to manipulate. Everything is done via your computer or your phone, your iPhone or Google phone. And so, again, people that are a little bit more comfortable with technology and like that convenience, they tend to gravitate toward this. And so, again, there is nothing that says one is better than the other, because, again, if you're uncomfortable using it and you have it, it can be the latest and greatest, but if you're not using all of its capabilities, it's kind of pointless. And so we also have timers that can be attached to your hose bibs, so that way if you want to water by a soaker hose or something of that, you can be able to still control an automatic on and off time. And so if you have areas of your property that are remote, because you have a large property and you have a vegetable garden or something that's in a distant part of the property, you can have these individual valves that have the timer as well as all the wiring configured, so you don't have to run a long stretch of actual wire to the timer. Everything is encapsulated all together, so where you would be able to enter the information of when you want the valve to open and for how long you want the water to be applied to your plant material. So
What power is that one?
that one is typically powered by a battery, so usually a 9-volt battery. And so with those, you'll just have to, again, make sure that it's kept up to date with an effective battery. So these all come with wonderful, exhaustive manuals. And so the manufacturer would much rather you refer to the manual and even call them on their toll-free numbers to troubleshoot any issues that you're having or gaps that need to be bridged for you to keep their product. They would much rather you keep their product than go out and buy a new one or a competitor's. So just be aware of that. These are resources that are free. If you don't have them from the initial installation, you can easily download them from the internet of the manufacturer's websites. And so knowing the type of timer you have, that's one piece of the puzzle. And so once you're comfortable with the timer, then you can go out into your yard and use this wonderful tool that we passed out, which is a soil probe. And with this picture here, what we're showing is two different soil profiles from two different yards. And so just let's get some feedback. What do we see between the two of these? What are some just obvious differences that you guys can notice? Color was one of them.
One looks moist, one doesn't.
Okay. Which one would you say looks moist?
The one on the left.
The one on the left? Okay. So different soil makeups, you know. This one definitely looks like it has a lot more air gaps or openings, whereas this one is a lot more compact. And so that's very typical of tract homes. When the developers come in, there's usually a lot of cutting of soil to make everything level, or in some cases filling of soil to fill up any voids or depressions that were naturally there originally. And so once the builder is done, they do not want to have the foundation shift at all. That's a bad scenario, right? So if you've ever remember a nursery rhyme, the wise man built his house upon the sand? No, the rock. The wise man built his house upon the rock because the sand will wash away. And so a similar approach is taken with development of homes. They compact the area, the natural soil in many cases, so that way there's less shifting that can occur. But what happens is that if they do that to all of the soil on the property, that means they've done it to the landscaped areas as well, potentially. And so you may have a top layer of maybe an inch or two of fluffy soil, but as you get down deeper, you may come into contact with something that looks like this. And that's okay. That doesn't mean it's a bad lawn or area that you have. You just have to know how to manage it and work with it, okay? And we're gonna get into a little bit more of that, of how to work with it. And so, but just understanding that this tool is easily used. You can pick them up at any of the supply locations that we referred to earlier, as well as going online to buy it. This is another way you can check to see if you even need to water. Before you even turn the sprinkler system on, you can go out and do a couple of different probes. Take a look. How deep is the moisture in the soil presently? Is it all the way down past the probe and the sample that you took out, or is it only getting wet the first couple of inches or so? The other thing you can do with this is break up the soil a little bit and see how far down your roots are going. If your roots are only going down 2 to 3 inches, but your water saturation is down to 6 or 8 inches, you're watering a little bit more than is needed. Now, you can also come to a scenario where you're trying to encourage deeper roots to grow. And so depending on what you're doing, that's all going to affect how often and how frequently you're watering. So again, you can start to see how it's not an easy 10 minutes every so many days. There's a lot of moving parts. Also, how old is the plant material? Are you trying to establish sod that was cut from a farm, or are you trying to establish a grass that was from seed? Those are all different scenarios that you have to consider.
Do the probes have a ram to push out the soil sample?
No, there is no ram, so generally you would have to just use it with your finger or a screwdriver if you wanted to not get dirty.
So you push it down,
Mm-hmm.
so you've got the core sample within the steel tube, right?
Right, within the steel tube, but the tube, if someone can show me, the steel tube is not completely encapsulated. It'll have an opening for you to see the profile. Yeah, just as this is open on part of it, you'll have that opening to be able to dislodge and kind of fiddle with the soil to see how deep the water is, as well as the roots that you're working with. There you go. Thank you, sir.
What are those things called?
A soil probe. Mm-hmm. And so again, with the soil, the difference along with that is the mineral makeup distribution. So with the undisturbed soil, you see that the mineral matter is about 45%, and then it has a nice balance of water as well as air and organic material. And in contrast, you have a lot more mineral matter in the compacted soil because, again, we're squeezing out more of the water and air area. And so you can start to see how the compacted soil will have some more challenges that you'll have to just manage. Again, it's not to say that one is better than the other, but you can see how one will have pros and others will have cons. And so there are soil amendments and processes that you can put into practice. One of those being aeration. If you've there's an aerating device that you can rent, or there's a small piece of equipment where you basically put what look like big spikes on your shoe and walk around, and you're just creating large plugs or openings for the soil to allow for more air and water and to kind of loosen up the soil. You can use that aeration device and also then introduce some compost or some other material to be able to add to the soil and to mix up the content. Because your soil, it comes in a lot of different varieties and makeups. If you ever were to have taken a soil class in college or local education system, you'll see that there's a exhaustive science that goes into it. There's a whole pyramid of soil types. You can have your clay soil, you can have your mixtures of a loamy clay. For simplicity, we classify it as sand, loam, or clay. Loam being a combination of the clay and the sand. And so this is a jar test that you can do where you would take small samples of the soil throughout your yard, put them into one jar, mix it up, and then let it settle. And then based on how it settles, you would then be able to classify it. If you see predominantly more sand than loam or clay, you could make the general assumption that you have a more sandy soil. If it's in the middle, you could classify it as loam or clay. Again, just knowing what you have so then you can then act accordingly. And so here's a little fun video that will show how the different soil types will accept water and how the water moves through the different soil types over a... So again, you saw how the different soil types caused the water to move in a different manner. And so again, another piece of the puzzle to let you make an educated decision on how you want to water your plant material based on the soil types that you have. If you have a more clay makeup of the soil on your property, then you may have to water shorter periods of time but more frequently. So if you want to water a total of, say, 5 minutes, you may have to do it in multiple 1-minute increments, because after 1 minute, the water will start to run off because the soil the soil cannot accept and have it pushed down fast enough. And so you might have to water for a little bit, stop, let gravity pull that water down a little bit, and then be able to make another application to get that depth that you're looking for, as well as the horizontal area being covered. And so the next piece of the puzzle that you'll want to do, make sure you have in your arsenal, is knowing what areas of your property are going to be watered with each of the valves. If you've ever turned on your system, do you know where each individual watering area is? Some do, some don't. Sometimes you might have a piece of paper on the inside of the box that has a legend, so to say, or a list. You know, number 1 will be front grass or back grass. Just be aware if you have purchased a new home and it has some information, I would double check it, because like anything, issues happen and then modifications occur, and so it may not be accurate or up to date. And so just making sure it is up to date, and when repairs or adjustments are made, making sure it reflects the current status of the system. And so ideally, it would make sense to have a flow to your irrigation system to where the first area will go and then the second, third, so that way you can easily keep track of issues and maintenance. And so with a timer, the scheduling is something that can easily be manipulated through the dial settings. And so with this timer, this is a very basic timer that you could pick up at Home Depot or Lowe's. It would not be considered a smart timer or a timer that would potentially qualify for a rebate, but that's okay because this timer is only about $20 to $40 and it's very, very functional, just as an example. And so in contrast, one of these Ratio timers is anywhere from $200 to $300. And so you do get a lot more functionality and ability to remotely control the device, whereas with this timer, you would have to be at the timer making adjustments as well as turning the system on and off. So again, there's not one that's better than the other. It just depends on what you're most comfortable with and are actually able to use. So with the timer, you would have this dial. The first thing that you would want to do with any timer is to make sure it has the accurate clock setting for the date and time. Because of course, if it's set for the wrong time and you're thinking it's going to come on at 7, but the timing is off, it's not going to jive and you're not going to potentially know why. Same thing with the date, that can affect it as well. And so you'll want to set the clock to its setting. You'll be using the plus and the minus sign to be able to increase or decrease the particular setting that you are on. And then if you want to advance from the hour to the minutes, for example, or from the year to the date or month, you would then be able to use these arrows to advance to the next option within the timer. Once you've gone and set the clock, you could set the date, and then you would go on to the start time. The start time is just that, what time of the day do you want the system to begin watering? So 7 o'clock in the morning, 5 o'clock in the morning, when's the best time? Yes? When is the best time? I was waiting for it. It really depends. So if you water late in the evening time, that's not a bad thing. One thing that it potentially will create is an environment where grubs or other diseases can thrive because it has a long period of overnight soaking and saturation that happens, as opposed to if you water in the early morning, you allow enough time for the water to penetrate the soil, to be pushed down into the soil level deeper, and then the sun will come out and kind of start the photosynthesis process from happening with your plant material and also the evaporation and everything. So there's less time for that wet, logged period, which could be happening overnight. Because again, some plants, they like that. They like the ability to have a wet, moist area, and others actually don't like that. And if they have too much of that soaked, constantly wet area, it can cause an environment where diseases can thrive. And so again, being familiar with your plant material, the age of it, what type of needs it has, because just as an example, a native California shrub, here is a soil, I'm sorry, not a soil, but it's a profile of how much water different plant material will need. At the top here we have cool season turf, which is about 48 inches a year. 48 inches a year, okay? So, of course, if you had your large lawn, if you were to fill up a container, it would be about 2 feet. 4 feet, thank you. And so, but how much water do we naturally get in California, would you say? You remember in Laguna Beach area? 12 inches. So the difference you would have to make up with supplemental watering or your irrigation system, okay? Now, in contrast to that, you have your native plants, which only need, look at that, about 12 inches, which happens to coincide with the natural rainfall that we get. Surprise, surprise. And so other...
What about the palm tree? Do you water it?
It depends, again, on its variety, because there are palm trees that are more tropical and have naturally developed in that area. And so that's not to say that a tropical plant won't be able to thrive in a Mediterranean climate, but it may need additional watering, or if you're okay with that plant material not looking as healthy and growing as fast as it would in its natural environment, then you can get away with less watering, okay? Plants are very resilient, just as humans are. We'll be able to grow as fast or as slow as our environment allows. If we have a lot of available food and minerals, you know, our waistlines will move accordingly. And same thing with plant material. They'll grow as fast or as slow as we give them water and nourishment. And so just keeping all that in mind will allow you to, again, make those better decisions and manage your water appropriately. And so once we have the start time, then we can go ahead and set the run time, which is how long that particular zone is going to be activated for. And so it could be 2 minutes, it could be 3 minutes. With your start times, you do have the option of multiple start times, which would allow you to water clay soils with those frequent intervals if needed. So with the start times, depending on the timer, it can be limited to 1 start time or up to 5 or 6, depending on how sophisticated your timer is. With this particular timer, I believe it allows for 3 start times. So you'd be able to potentially water 3 times on any particular day. But again, it's just an added tool to allow you to manage your water and to keep your plant material alive and healthy. And then once you get past all those, then it's to how often, which is how many days you want to water. If you want to water every day or every 3 days, on the odd days of the week, these are all choices that you can select with this timer. And so again, knowing your plant material, knowing how much water your system is even outputting, those are all pieces that need to be known so you can manage it accordingly. So do you think your landscaper or professional that's helping you maintain it knows this much information? No. Okay. So this might be an opportunity for you to either work with your landscaper and bridge that gap if there is any, or there might be an opportunity for you to do a little investigating online to try and find a professional that you can have more confidence in, to be able to, again, free yourself up if you don't choose to do it yourself, okay? And so,
We send those people here.
you know what, we do professional landscape training. We're actually holding one in Mission Viejo, and so we have about 40 professional landscapers or designers that are going through that curriculum, which is very similar and actually more in depth than what we're going into here, to allow them to know the cutting edge practices and equipment that's out there to be able to give them better value to their customers.
When will that be?
Right now it's currently happening, and then we will be adding more to our schedule just as participation and interest dictates. So,
And how can we find out?
it'll be available on our website. So yeah, if you just keep frequenting that on a regular basis, that'll keep you updated. You can always call in as well, and we can keep you updated that way. And so with all of the pieces of the puzzle that we've communicated to you, this is one resource that's available for free to be able to allow you to enter all of those pieces of the puzzle, the type of sprinkler you have, the type of plant material that you have, the type of soil you have, to have a starting point of a watering schedule that will tell you how often, how long to water for. So if we go to bewaterwise.com, no problem, what I'll have you do is enter some of the information here as I go through it. As the page loads up, Lindsay will scroll down a little bit, and we're going to be here in this watering calculator section. So she's going to click on that. Another page is going to open up, and this is going to be the watering calculator. It'll give you some background information which will make more sense after this class. And then as you go through that, you'll be able to enter your zip code, because the zip code will be pulling historical ET data. Just as John shared at the beginning of the presentation, that every area has a specific weather, has different weather features specific to that area, meaning inland area is going to be a little bit hotter than coastal areas. So having the zip code will pull historical information to be able to put into the equation. And then you'll be able to identify what area this is for. Is this like a front yard or a backyard or a shrub? Just for your knowledge. And then you can make a selection based from this drop down. Are you watering cool season turf, warm season grass? Low water use plants would be more accustomed to the native or similar, or are they moderate or high water using plants? And so cool season turf is going to look very similar to like a head of hair. It'll have individual blades of grass, and it's much more common if you've ever been on the East Coast and seen what's called Kentucky bluegrass. That is what's called cool season turf. And the difference between that and warm season turf is warm season turf has a lot of shoots. And so if you've heard of Bermuda grass, St. Augustine grass, those are considered warm season turf grass varieties. And so warm season turf, so cool season turf requires about that 48 inches. Warm season turf is about 38 inches. And so they both have different growing patterns and different characteristics. But those are the two primary easy differences. And you can also use the hyperlink here that says type of plants as well as grasses, ground cover. It'll give you additional information to help you identify what material you're working with. And then you can enter what type of soil you have, because that's a key part as well. And so if you know you have a clay loam, you can do that. And then you can decide, are you working with sprinklers, impacts, bubblers? And if you know the output of gallons per minute, you can then make an adjustment there. Is it a low flow one or moderate? The default is about a gallon, which we saw in some of those videos. When a sprinkler system is working at optimal specifications, it usually lets out about a gallon to about a gallon and a half per minute. And so if you have a drip or micro spray system, you can also select from there. And so it's either going to be this one or this one. So you make that choice. And then you would add another area if you wanted to, or go to create my schedule. And if you scroll down, again, this will give you some information. But here's your schedule for the whole year as a starting point, okay? Based, again, on those specifications that we've spent 2 hours going over. And so for January, as a starting point, you could do 5 minutes per watering time. Look at that, only twice a week, okay? In the winter time, we still commonly see 5 times a week or even 7 times a week. It's just way too much. So again, as a starting point, you would only need to do it for 5 minutes twice a week for a total of 10 minutes for that respective week. And so if we jump over here into the summertime, you'll see that it's still only 5 minutes a week. 5 minutes per run time, because again, that is associated with the soil. How much time can pass for the soil to be able to accept water before it starts to run off. And again, it's going to be about 3 to 5 minutes, okay, for a clay loamy soil. If you have a really hard clay, it may be less. And so then we move down to the start times per week. We have 7. Some customers choose to do it 7 days a week. We would never recommend that, because we would recommend a deeper watering less frequently. So what you could do is still do it 7 times per week, but using that interval feature or the multiple start times on the controller. So if it was watering 3 times a week on, say, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, you would just have to water on each of those days maybe twice a day, okay? In that scenario, you would end up with 2, 4, 6, so you'd be missing a day, but more than likely you would be able to miss out on that 7th start time in many cases. But again, the total run time for the whole week would be 35 minutes. Usually 35 minutes is very common that we see for a watering of one day, believe it or not.
Is that one station?
Yes, we have seen that. Because again, a lot of it is a combination of misunderstandings, whether it be the plant material that they're watering, they think it needs more water than it really does, or they enter information thinking that the start times is how long it's running for, and so they mistakenly put 5 or 6 start times, and again, it's just misunderstanding of the device that they're using. Or they used an old timer that was different that they were used to. Now this one is made up and configured differently, so they use the old system's settings and just think that they can transition them, and it doesn't always work. And then they get the high bill potentially and are upset and frustrated. And because a lot of times it's natural that we hire a professional because we don't feel confident in the equipment that we have. And so it's like anything, tying your shoe, did you get it right the first time? Probably not. I didn't. You know, even with walking, we had to continually get up after we fell down as children. And the same thing with this. Anything that we do, whether it's a new hobby or interest, there's going to be that learning curve. And with plant material and landscaping, it's the same thing. But if you stick with it, you'll get past those stumbling blocks and you'll gain more confidence. And then again, if you decide to do it on your own, you can do that, or be able to then have that much more confidence in being able to follow up to make sure the professional you have hired is doing a job that's worth the money that you're paying them. And so with that, if we can go back to the PowerPoint, thanks. So again, that's bewaterwise.com, and along with the watering schedule, there's a lot of other information that's very valuable there. They even have a section where you can do a complete redesign of your yard if that's what you want to do. Because one thing to remember too is that plant material, it has a lifespan. So with a shrub, in some cases, it may only realistically last, even in its natural environment, about 5 to 10 years, because at a certain point, the growth that the plant has won't be able to go any further because their environment doesn't allow them to. Their root structure is confined to a certain amount, and so eventually there'll be too much plant material and it won't be able to sustain itself, and so it will just naturally die out. Again, life has its cycles, and so plant material has its own cycle of life. And so if you've ever been in a homeowner association that's 30 or 40 years old, or even in Mission Viejo, for instance, a lot of the slope common areas that are adjacent to the major arterial streets, there's a lot of renovation that's happening where they're ripping out the old plant material that's just looking a little bit more raggedy and more woody, and they're planting it with newer material because that older plant material has gone through its kind of life cycle of looking aesthetically pleasing. And so it's just that time to revamp and renovate and replant. And so, I'm sorry, I thought I heard something. We also have a lot of rebates that are available through our website. And so we do have washing machine rebates, toilet rebates are still available. This is a rebate for a soil moisture sensor. Depending on your timer, you can install and then connect the wiring for a soil moisture sensor that will do just that. It will sense the moisture in the soil on a constant basis. So you won't have to preemptively just say it's going to water every 3 days, for instance. It will take the information from the soil sensor and communicate to the timer and say, based on the settings that you've programmed, once it gets to about 50% soil moisture, then we will allow for another watering to happen, or whatever parameter you set for it. And so there's rebates out there for that. Again, also timers, water catchment devices if you're trying to catch rainwater and keep it on site for later use. That's also available, as well as the nozzles and turf removal as well. Your question, sir?
Do you know where to get those water?
It depends on the size you're trying to purchase. If you just do a typical 55-gallon one, those are a lot more easily found just locally. The larger ones that you may be interested in become more specialized, and so you might have to find them online for a local vendor or a vendor that would ship them to you. And so, because again, they come in different sizes. We've seen customers that are very, very proactive in this arena, and they want to catch as much water from the rain to be able to use for their purposes on site. And so we've seen large above ground catchment devices and even very sophisticated below ground ones that have pumps and recirculating systems. But again, with doing all of that, there becomes a maintenance aspect to it that a lot of times people don't consider completely. Because if you're doing something on site, if it doesn't have proper coverings, it can potentially be an area where mosquitoes can breed. And so those are all things that the county is concerned about. So just being aware and then making your decision accordingly. So
So do you get the rebate from that OC Water Smart?
yeah, so these are two different resources to start out from. Just so you're aware, SoCal WaterSmart is a centralized location for customers in all of Southern California to be able to access rebates that are available. And they will be in conjunction with your local water agency. Us being Moulton Niguel Water District, we may have higher incentives than a neighboring water agency. And that's just because of the funding that we have available and the way we manage our programs. And so just be aware that some of the advertisements that you might see at Home Depot or other places or even other websites might not always reflect the current funding amount for rebates. And so when in question, always feel free to give us a call. There's a feature within this website where you can enter your personal information and it will associate you with your respective water provider to give you the most accurate, up-to-date funding amounts that are available.
Okay.
Yes, sir?
Going back to the outdoor, that picture, is that sod?
Yes. This is a picture of sod that is actually being installed, but we're hoping that we're taking the look of it being removed, because that's what we're trying to display with this picture, is that we do have an incentive for turf removal, because again, in most cases, turf is going to be the highest watering plant material that a customer can choose to install. And so if we can incentivize them to remove it and install plant material that's more drought tolerant or native, then of course that would just mean lower water bill for them. We would be less dependent on importing water from Northern California or the Colorado River. So it's a win-win for everyone.
So is there turf that's, uses less water, it needs less water?
Yeah. There are turf varieties out there, one of them being buffalo grass. It's UC Verde buffalo grass. Yep, not many people have, but it is something that's out there. It was created by the agronomists within the UC system, and it's a very low water using plant material, turf material. It is not a qualifying plant material to be used for the rebate, unfortunately. The reason being is because it does look very, very similar to cool season turf. So unless a customer was familiar with how to maintain it and how to water it, it could easily be associated as cool season turf and then overwatered.
Okay, so how could I find out what turf is eligible for rebate?
That would be available through the OC WaterSmart website. There are terms and conditions that can be read through, which have appropriate plant material that can be installed and ones that would not be eligible, that if were installed would not qualify for a rebate.
There is no turf that qualifies.
Yes.
I guess synthetic turf. But
Yes.
you come to the wrong place if you.
Yeah, synthetic turf is eligible for a rebate, and so we don't encourage it just because it has its own set of issues with it. But again, if the customer was adamant about it, it would qualify for a rebate. So you would remove the existing turf, have the synthetic turf installed, and and then you'd be able to have your. Some of the issues is that it does retain a lot of the heat in the summertime. So if you have animals or children, it can create an environment where it's too hot for them. So if you do have animals or children, and you do want to have the synthetic turf, you just have to be aware that it will get hot. It will get hot, so you may have to hose it down before the pets or children play on it. The other thing is that if you don't regularly hose it off, if you do have pets, some of the waste from the animal can fester and create other environments for diseases to grow as well, if it's not maintained. Again, that maintenance factor to it.
Because it generates heat, would that, would your air conditioning needs go up?
Potentially, just because again, you would have that radiant heat that would be surrounding the property that could have a contributing impact into the overall heat. But that just depends on your insulating inside, and that's a whole nother, long presentation we can get into. But we have actually seen issues too where, depending on the type of windows you have, if they reflect the UV rays, they can actually bounce off from the windows and melt the synthetic turf. We've seen that happen. And so just again, these are things that we've come across that hopefully you can be empowered and then make a decision accordingly. So another thing with synthetic turf is that when they install it, they remove the existing turf along with about anywhere from 3 to 6 inches of the native or present soil. So you're completely ripping out any native soil that might have its own microorganisms and bacteria that's there for the benefit of the plants, to where that's all removed and it's pretty much just sand and gravel that's replaced, because we don't want to see the customer with synthetic turf have wet, muddy spots. So we have to allow for that drainage to occur. And so if you do that, and let's say you purchase a home that has synthetic turf, but then you want to plant live plant material, you'll have to rip up all of that synthetic turf, all of the gravel and the sand, introduce new soil, allow for the biology to reestablish itself, and then be able to plant your new plants again. So again, we understand that everyone has different preferences, but hopefully if we educate them, they might be able to make a decision that they might regret later in life. So we also have mywater.mnwd.com. This is a portal for the customers to be able to communicate with us a little bit more easily through their mobile devices or through the website. So they can actually pull up information of their historical water usage, so they don't have to keep their water bills on hand. Eventually we'll be at a point where we will be able to remotely access up-to-date usage information, so the customer can go online as well and access their usage to see if over the last day or week or month, if they've been tracking to use an appropriate amount of water, or possibly they're going to exceed their budget in a similar way that the utilities, gas and electric, have currently. You can kind of know mid-month if you're the first half of your billing cycle, if it continues in that pattern, if you're going to exceed your budgeted amount, or if you'll be able to stay within a reasonable amount. And so
that's a smart meter then.
we do have some smart meters out there. And so again, if you log in and register, if you register and then log in, you'll be able to quickly know if you have one of those smart meters with that capability or not. If you don't, it's not the end of the world. We just haven't been able to implement that in your area currently. Because again, it's a slow process of getting all of this system upgraded and updated. And so these are some additional resources that you'll find on your handout. We did do the bewaterwise.com. Again, also within that website, there's a nice PDF checklist for you to be able to use as you turn on your system, whether it's by yourself or with your professional, to be able to note issues and then hopefully follow up to make sure they were corrected or remedied. My Audubon Garden, that's a great resource for being able to pick kind of a one-stop solution for California natives. It has a selection of different palettes that you can choose from based on color preferences and the size of your landscape that you're working with. So that's just another resource. CNPS is the California Native Plant Society, which will give you a lot of resources for local native plants, exhaustive information of where they're native to, the conditions in which they thrive, how much water they like, how their growth patterns are, if they are very slow or very fast growing, what the ultimate height or diameter will be of this plant in maturity. Because again, a lot of customers, they see a pretty purple flower and they want to plant it, not knowing that it's going to grow to be 30 feet wide and 10 feet tall, you know. And so, and then when they plant them, they plant 10 of them all together. And so knowing all of that will, again, cause less headache in the future. Sunset.com is another great resource that's very similar. CSANS, that stands for the California Sprinkler Adjustment. Actually, it's wrong. I forget what it stands for. If you go to that website, it will explain the acronym. But what it is, it's a system that will give you automatic updates through email to be able to make adjustments on your timer. With this particular timer, this is considered a smart timer that has a rebate available for it. It has a feature that's called a seasonal adjust feature. That seasonal adjust feature allows you to set the timer for the summertime, which would be the hottest time of the year in most cases. And then from there, you would go to the seasonal adjustment, and it would take and make an adjustment based on the percentage of that summer schedule. So if 100% of the summer schedule was 10 minutes of watering, and you adjusted it down to 50% in the fall, it would take that 10 minutes and cut it in half to 5 minutes, 50% of that. And so that's just a feature that some customers like to be able to use. So instead of having to make an adjustment to each individual zone, you could simply just say across the board, cut all of the time to 50% or 20%, however you wanted to make that adjustment. So again, it's just another tool to use if you like it. Some people like it. Some people like the idea of having more control over their timer. And so this is a Hunter, yes, there's a Hunter Pro C timer. So, and so with that, we appreciate your time and energy that you spent getting here and making it through. We hope it was beneficial. This is our contact information. We are the Water Efficiency Department. You can reach us through this general email address, and then this phone number will get you directly to our department, so you won't have to funnel through the original customer service line and then be transferred. You can call us directly. John loves to have voicemails, as well as Lindsay and myself, so if you don't get a hold of us and it does go to voicemail, just know that we will get to you in a timely manner, usually 24 to 48 hours. Yes, ma'am. Yes, it's the last slide on your packet. And so we'll be here to answer any questions as well. Feel free to come up, and we'll do one last drawing for this.
I thought it was jam-packed with information, and a lot of useful topics were covered. I learned a lot about the climate zones, the irrigation equipment, timers, and sprinkler types.
Anything that you would put into use in the next couple months?
Yes, I'm going to replace my controller timer, and also I'd like to go to rotor sprinkler heads. Oh, and also the pressure adjusting stem is what it was, PAS stem. That sounds like a really good improvement.
Perfect, perfect. It was a good presentation. I learned a lot. Some of the questions I had in my mind were answered. and I'm happy to be here and taking the lecture. Well, yes, about the agencies that I can check online and learn more about what they offer, and that way learn more about the different plant material, and be able to make a selection so I can conserve more water.
But we had a lot of sand where we were, which was just amazing. So we were curious to see about the different soil types, and this was so fascinating. Watching the water go through the different types, I'm sure now the water that we're putting on our sand is just going down awful fast. So that's one thing we definitely learned here. The different types of sprinklers. We had a new sprinkler system installed, and we also had a drip system installed, but there are some facts here about the drip system that I didn't know, and about the fact that you can change the water pressure on some of the sprinkler heads, which was good. As a matter of fact, our plumber, when he was there, he was checking the pressure, and he said our pressure from the street was way too high. So he put a brand new regulator there, pressure regulator. So anybody that's got any type of landscaping, this is the type of seminar you want to go to learn about all this stuff. But the presentations were excellent, top notch. It was nice to see the videos too, which was interesting. And all the websites that are listed there, I said, there's so much information today on the websites, you can't go wrong looking for information. So all in all, this was just fabulous. I appreciate it.
Well, we actually do a residential landscaping workshop. We ran one in the fall, winter, and spring. We had over 300 customers attend, and every time we had a customer there, we would ask them questions. What more do you want to learn? What are some of the pain points that you have at home? And the big one was really irrigation. And so we just decided, well, let's put on a whole workshop that's designed around irrigation. And while we have customers here, we can explain to them how their budgets work and kind of the natural rainfall cycles and the different plants that are available to plant at that time. And also just kind of to deal with some common misperceptions with irrigation and teach people terminology in their landscape. I guess I would say that we have a lot of resources for customers. Between workshops and like just educational events and rebates and programs, there are a lot of resources out there and a lot of ways to get to them. The best way to find all the available resources is to check our website, which is mnwd.com. And that's where you can sign up for classes. It's where you can apply for rebates. There's just all sorts of resources available there.